And I think another thing on intimate landscapes, we don't live in the vast West. We don't have big landscapes where we live in Ohio. So I think oftentimes we're forced into the little stuff. Excuse my voice if it comes and goes. It's just allergy season for me. All right, let's see if we're good to go. All right, so what is an intimate landscape? So basically, an intimate landscape is taking what's in the environment and putting a frame around it and finding the little stuff. And it might be the stuff that nobody sees. They don't typically see. I know when I go out with friends, even when there's a big landscape, I'm so busy looking for the little stuff, I forget to look up and see the big thing and have to remind myself to get the big thing as well. So it's finding the little scenes inside the big scenes. So there's an intimacy involved in this. So you've got to get kind of up close and personal in your environment. It's being familiar with that environment. And going back, we'll talk about that in a little bit, going back to the same place over and over again really helps you develop that skill set. So you have to get personal and emotional. And what's neat about intimate landscapes versus the large landscape, if we go out as a club, and if you guys have been to the Smokies, one of the places we go on our workshop is Foothills Parkway for sunrise. And everybody goes back and has kind of the same picture. But if you do the intimate stuff and you turn around and look at the hill behind you, or the tree lines at either end of the parking lot, then you start to get something that's unique and different and personal to you, that you respond to. So it allows you to create those images that are unique to you. And oftentimes it tells more of a story than that big epic landscape will. So it typically, again, is a narrow focus, a narrower view of the landscape versus the macro, which is more the magnification of the small stuff. And oftentimes, when you talk about intimate landscapes, you can go intimate landscapes, close-ups, macro. And so close-ups kind of go between the macro and the intimate landscapes. So you'll see stuff that you think is maybe not an intimate landscape, but it can be considered more just a close-up. And what we want to do with intimate landscapes is we really want to focus on those compositional building blocks. So you want to look at lines and shapes and patterns, repetition, color, textures, the light. All of those things are almost more critical in an intimate landscape than a larger landscape. Because a large landscape, you're going to go, oh my gosh, look at that. An intimate landscape, you're looking at a much smaller picture, and so that almost needs to be a better composition. So the things that this requires is that we explore. So that doesn't mean that you walk up, you see something, plant your tripod, put the camera on, take a picture, and move on. What you need to do is plant the tripod, but don't pick up the camera yet. You need to be walking around, exploring and observing what is in that space. There's contemplation involved, so you have to stop and think about what you see in front of you. And there are photographers, Guy Tall is one, Colleen Minnick, there's a lot of them that will say, carry around a little notebook and sit down for a minute or stand there. Write down your thoughts about that scene that you see in front of you. What are you attracted to? What are you responding to? What are the emotions, feelings, reactions to that scene? And if you have those written down, that can help you when you're going back home, downloading that picture, and then you are thinking about, what's my final composition? What was I seeing, and how do I represent that in my artistic representation in my processing? So, and then you want to distill the scene down to the core elements of that scene. So you want to look at what are the specifics that I'm drawn to and how do I capture that the best I can. And again, that looking down, because oftentimes that's where you see things. So the grandfather of intimate landscapes is Elliott Porter, and this is a quote of his. Photography is an art of observation. It has little to do with the things you see and everything to do with the way that you see them. How many people have ever studied or learned about Elliott Porter at all? Anybody? Not too many. Okay. I brought some books with me. If you guys would like to look at them, you can still find some of these. And if you guys are members of your libraries, try and see if you can get his books. I was surprised at the Cincinnati Library how many of their books they had. But he was in the 1990s, or the 1900s. He really was the one that developed the concept of intimate landscape. And he really looked, again, at the details in the scene and distilled it down to the core elements of that scene. And again, that's a more natural, personal view of the landscape versus the big one. You have to have that connection between the photographer and the subject. And he was one of the first ones to embrace color in his photography. And he considered photography a creative art, just not a representation of what you see. So this is a book that he authored. He worked a lot with Ansel Adams, and he also worked with the Sierra Club. And I happen to have this book. My husband bought this for me as a Christmas present, obviously used, and it was like $125 to get it. But there's an area in Colorado called Glen Canyon. And he and the Sierra Club were really advocating for them not to build the dam for electricity purposes. And he photographed the canyon. They put this together. They presented it to the United States Congress, trying to get Congress to intervene to prevent the flooding of the canyon. They were not successful because it is flooded. But it really kind of opened the door, especially with the Sierra Club and Ansel Adams, to getting the government to recognize that preserving nature and these beautiful places was important. And so a lot of things came out of that in terms of the national parks, and the Wilderness Act was a result of the work that he did. He was also the first one to have a solo exhibition of color photography at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I've got intimate landscapes as well. And the funny thing is, this picture that's on the front, it's from the Smokies, and I had this poster and didn't have any idea who Elliott Porter was. Hung on my wall for years. I love redbud trees. You can't really tell real well that that's what that is, but that's one of my favorite trees, and that's what attracted me to the poster. And then did a workshop in the Smokies with Will Clay. And I was out shooting one time and brought my images back in, and Will says, "You shoot just like Elliott Porter." And I was like, "Well, who's Elliott Porter?" So then I started studying him and went, yeah, I kind of like what he does. And here's some other photographers, current photographers, that you ought to pay attention to if you like intimate landscapes. Sarah Marino and her husband Ron have lots of really good stuff. Sarah is just an outstanding intimate landscaper. David Ward, I've heard him called kind of the Elliott Porter of current times. He's out of England, I believe. Charlotte Gibb, Hans Strawn, who's out of Sweden, I believe, and Guy Tall. So those are all some of the more famous intimate landscapers. You might want to look at their work. Sarah and Ron have a lot of online ebooks, and they actually do a lot of little books that they'll put out there that you can download for free. I mean, they're just great, and they have a newsletter email letter that they do. Again, so close-up photography is just getting in a little tighter than those intimate scenes and paying attention to the details that maybe nobody else would see. Whereas the intimate landscape is focusing on the arrangement of those smaller details out of a landscape or a scene. So let's move from a grand landscape Bryce Canyon, to the more intimate scenes, and we'll keep distilling it down. So I was lucky enough to do a 12-day trip in Colorado this fall with my best friend, attended a 5-day workshop while I was out there. But this was when we were wandering on our own, saw a sign as we were driving down the road, said Twin Lakes. We said, let's go see what Twin Lakes looks like. And this is what we found. That's considered a grand landscape. But let's start bringing it down. So this was up on Owl Pass out of Ouray. And notice now I've cut the sky out. And while this is still a very big scene, those of us who have been in the mountains can visualize how big that is. It's a much smaller scene than the previous one. So we've come down a little bit more. And now we've come down even more. And so when we were at Owl Pass, everybody's shooting the big scenes. That big scene that I shot of Owl Pass was one of the last things I took a picture of before we left. This was one of the first things I went to. So this is where my mind and my eye go to, is these little scenes. Getting smaller still. And just focusing in on some of the details in the environment. The one on the right, that was early morning light, so just paying attention to the light and what it's doing. This one on the left was at a ghost town and just the sign on the trees. So finding those little things. But you have to take the time to explore and observe and look at what's out there. And then getting even more detailed. So just bringing it down to the details in the scene. And it's telling a story. Do those pictures all tell a story? More so than I think a grand landscape can. And then being able to put those together if you want to use them. And while we're out there shooting, just to remind people, there's a horizontal view and there's a vertical view. Now, most people take that horizontal first and then have to remember to go vertical. I go vertical first and then have to remember to do horizontal. I probably shot more horizontals in Colorado than I've ever shot in my life, but all those aspen trees lend itself to that. But then look at, and this is an important thing to pay attention to as well, when you go from vertical to horizontal or vice versa, how it changes the impression that image gives you. So the horizontal gives you a more open scene, and there's more to that picture than just the tree. But then going to the vertical, the focus becomes the tree. So it can change the feel of that image and the emotions that it may create. So remember to do both. So equipment for doing intimate landscapes, not a whole lot different than what you use for everything else. Having zoom lenses is invaluable, just because that helps you focus in on those little details. I typically, probably the lens that's on my camera the most is my 24-105, but then putting on a 70-200 or a 70-300 is outstanding for intimate landscapes. For all kinds of reasons. Obviously, you can zoom in, it compresses the background, it blows the background out in terms of sharpness, lots of good things. Having a sturdy tripod and having an L bracket on your camera. How many people have an L bracket? Pretty good. If you don't have one, think about it. Because when you line that camera up to take a picture and your lens is right here, and you're shooting a horizontal, and now I want to go to a vertical, I can't go this way, so I'm going to flop the other way. You're going to flop it over, so my composition just changed, didn't it? Whereas if I take an L bracket and take the camera off and put the camera back on, my composition has stayed the same. I mean, it's changed a little bit because of the orientation, but the main focus hasn't changed. An L bracket is invaluable. Remote cable releases, polarizers. I have a polarizer on my camera probably 90% of the time because you can dial in how much you want, but even when you're taking pictures of flowers, there's reflected light on those leaves, and if you can knock that down, it can be a stronger picture. Reflectors, flashes, LED lights, diffusers, all those little things. Ground cloth, something to get yourself down on the ground when it's muddy and wet. Does anybody use a frame card like this? Can everybody see it? These are ideal to have too, because as you're walking around looking at a scene, you can go, oh, well, maybe that works. And coming up close tells me I need a wide angle. Going out like this tells me I need a longer lens. So it's really nice to have that, and you can change the orientation. But, you know, you can be scoping out images as you're walking along. And you can hook, you know, something through this to hang around your neck, and then it's just right there to grab. So these are really nice. And I use, depending on the time of day, a focusing cloth, you know, the old Ansel Adams pictures with the cloth over his head. People always ask me, why do you use that? But especially early and late in the day, when you've got side light coming in, how many of us are like cupping our like this to be able to see? And if you want to use your live view, you've got all that reflected light on it and you can't see. I put a focusing cloth on my camera and I tell people, come look at what you can do underneath there, and they go, oh my gosh. So even if you don't buy an official one, you can take a black hand towel or a dark navy blue and just throw it over your head. It makes a huge difference, and it really helps you focus in on your image. And I think one of the most important pieces of equipment are your feet. And again, it's that walking around and looking at what's out there to be seen. And you can't do that if you just take one spot. You know, you can come up on a flower and think, wow, look at that. But what's the background look like? And if I move over here, is it a better background for that flower? So there's lots of good reasons to walk around. So some tips for photographing. You want to minimize, and this is for anything, not just intimate landscapes, minimize the expectations that you go out with. So if you think, okay, tomorrow it's supposed to snow, I'm going down into the valley. But that's as far as my expectations go, because I typically just, whatever presents itself is what I'm going to shoot. But if you go out thinking, I want the beaver ponds with snow, maybe a couple birds, and you get down there and that's not there, are you disappointed? Are you frustrated? Versus if you just go down and look at what presents itself in front of you, you'll probably get better shots. You need to be willing to take some photographic risk and experiment. Okay, so this is new stuff. I think one of the best things that ever happened to me in my photography was digital cameras. Because I can remember going, when I first started going to the Smokies as an attendee at the workshops, and we were all still shooting film, slide film for that. And I would, over the course of, you know, the workshop was 4 days. If I added a day on either side, I might have 5 or 6 days. And I'd come home with 14, 15, 16 rolls of 36. You paid for the film, you paid for the developing, and then you sit down with your little light box and you start looking at those slides and you put them in the garbage can. And it's ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. Digital gives us the ability to shoot to our heart's content and not have to worry about the expense of what I'm shooting. I can't imagine having done large format or medium format. The nice thing too is that you've got instant feedback. So how many of us with film used to bracket, you know, if I had a shot I really, really, really thought was good, I would bracket that shot to make sure that I had some decent exposure in one of those 3 images. Now we've got the feedback from our camera with our histograms and the blinky highlights that tell us whether we've got a decent composition. We can blow it up. We think it looks sharp, but you blow it up and you go, well, that's not sharp, and then you reshoot. So digital cameras are just amazing. And it gives us that opportunity to try something, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, we try it again. Be willing to fail, because that's how we learn. We learn from our mistakes, and then we try again. Do not be self-conscious, because with intimate landscapes, oftentimes you're down on the ground and you may be in silly positions. And even if you're not in a silly position, right now, I look pretty foolish getting up off the ground as I age. And, these legs aren't as strong as they used to be, and the back doesn't work. And it's like, I hope nobody's looking. So you have to be willing. My husband came up out of fishing. He was fly fishing one time in the Smokies, and I was shooting mushrooms. And he came up, and I'm on the ground. He's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine." You've got to practice this, because with anything, practice makes perfect. And you have to follow your own path. And I think this is an important piece with intimate landscapes, and I get caught up in this all the time. When I go, camera clubs and people are showing their images. When I go to the Smokies and I teach in the workshop, there's 5 of us, and we always, show like 5 of our images at the beginning. And, one of the guys travels internationally for work, and he's got all these beautiful shots from all over the world. And, I've got pictures from Ohio, and it's just like, you have to get past, the intimate landscapes aren't always going to be those wow pictures like a grand landscape is going to be. And you got to get past that and be okay with it. And what makes me feel better is to look like at a Sarah Marino's pictures, or Guy Tall. I follow him on Facebook, and the pictures that he puts on there are always intimate landscapes, and they're beautiful. So follow your own path. Shoot what feeds your soul, not what's going to feed somebody else's. And I know all of us in camera clubs and, competitions, and I enter stuff in exhibits, and we're always trying to guess what the judges are going to like. Put in what you like, and if you don't win, that's okay, as long as you like it. Go back to familiar locations. You guys are so lucky to have Cuyahoga Valley National Park in your backyard. I mean, I'd give anything to be able to run down there all the time. That is so beautiful. But every city has got theirs. We have the Cincinnati Nature Center and lots of parks in Cincinnati. But go back to those same places over and over again. And I've been doing the Smokies workshop for 20 years. This will be my 21st year. Never missed one. And I know the section of the park that we photograph the most. And we're pretty much, Foothills Parkway, Cades Cove, Tremont Road, Metcalf Bottoms. And even when I'm on my own, those are some of my favorite places. And I'm finding that every year when I come home, I have fewer and fewer pictures. And it's not because I'm not out shooting. It's not because I don't see beautiful things, but I have shot there for so long that it has to be pretty spectacular, because I already maybe have a spectacular. And so now I have to become more creative. I have to stretch my skill set a little bit. I have to expand my vision of seeing a shot, because I have been there. And that makes me a better photographer. I may have fewer pictures, but I bet you I have better pictures because I'm working harder at it. So it's really good to go back to the same place over and over and over again. It inspires your creativity, and you can be responsive to special conditions. So in the winter, going down to the park, but when it snows, if you got fog, if you got a misty rain, get your camera and get the heck out the door. Because you can be there in a moment versus, I can hear that there's going to be snow in the valley, and it's 4 hours to get up here to see it, so probably not going to do it. All right, we're creating order out of chaos. So the forest and nature is messy, and we have to distill it down to something that is neat and clean and simple and tells a story. So isolate the elements. Learn to see through your lenses, and this is an important piece that I try and emphasize. One of the things I did several years ago, it might have been, I don't know if it was during COVID when we were just like bored to tears, And one weekend, I went to Kroger's and did my grocery shopping and brought home a whole bunch of flowers from their flower department. I set everything up on my kitchen table, and I have a really big one. I got out every piece of camera equipment that I owned, every lens, every teleconverter, every extension tube. I have a magnifying diopter that I can put on my lenses. Every lens. Got a pad of paper, set up a scene with those flowers, nothing fancy, just a bouquet of flowers, and I started shooting, and I spent the whole weekend doing it. And so I'd put a lens on and shoot with just the lens, and then I'd put the teleconverter on and see what that did, and I'd put an extension tube, and I'd use the magnifying diopter. And I recorded every shot, what number it was and what I was using. And you learned to see how your lenses see the world. And then when you're out in the field, you're more likely to know what lens you need to put on the camera to get the shot that you want. Think about, again, when you see a scene like that, what drew you to that scene? For me, it was just those little flowers. There are plants growing in the duckweed. I love the little leaf there. That's not placed. This is in a swamp, and I'm shooting over a railing. And I love the blue and the water behind and the patterns. And that's what my eye saw, and I captured it. So what pulls your eye? And again, visualize your final image. Simplify your scene down to the bare essence. Eliminate distracting elements. So one of the things that is nice about a tripod, and I hope most people will shoot on a tripod, once you get used to a tripod, I hear a lot of people that are new to it go, oh, I just can't shoot on a tripod, they're such a nuisance, and It gets to be second nature, and it gets to the point that I can't stand not to have a tripod. Even when I'm hiking with my husband, he's kind of used to the fact that there's going to be a camera over my shoulder, but when I get the tripod out of the car, he goes, you're not taking that, are you? And I said, well, yeah, I am, and I'm not asking you to carry it, so get over it. Because, and partly as we age, it's harder to be steady and still. But it's important because if I shoot the scene and then I see something that's infringing, I can reshoot it. I can recompose that scene. Whereas, or if I've blown the highlights out, there's little white specks in there. If I've blown those highlights out, I can reshoot it. And it's, I didn't take the shot. Now I'm looking at the camera going, oh, I got to reshoot that. And then I'm trying to recompose. And I'm not going to get the same composition. It's almost impossible. But if you're on a tripod, you can immediately reshoot. And you've got the same composition. You're just changing the exposure, or you've gotten up and done some photo gardening or whatever. So I always talk about the importance. Tripod will slow you down, gives you a better image, gives you a sharper image, and it gives you the chance to do what I call border patrol. So you should always be scanning around the edges of the frame to see if there's anything coming in that's going to be a distraction. And then decide what to include and what to exclude. And the exclusion piece is almost as important as the inclusion, because that simplifies your image. You've got to get close and personal, and don't be afraid to crop. So you can crop in camera, but then we can also crop when we're processing that image. One caution about framing in the camera, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm trying to back away from that a little bit. I'm sure I cropped this in processing to get it as featured as I wanted. You have to be careful about cropping too tight in the camera, because say you're shooting architecture, and so you're shooting up and you've got, the lines coming in and going out and all of that, and you're going to have to use your perspective compensation tool in processing. But when you do that perspective correction, you're cropping the image. And sometimes it's going to crop in onto stuff you don't want cropped out. So I'm trying to learn to make sure that I leave a little bit of space around what I would typically frame to give me that cropping ability later if I need it. The other thing about cropping and the importance of cropping is the closer you can get your image frame to the subject and what you want the person to be looking at, the stronger your image is going to be. So this image is pretty tightly cropped, but if I had a whole lot of this stuff up here and over here, this gets lost a little bit, versus when I put the image frame real close to it, that makes it stand out. So make sure when you're processing your images that you play with cropping a little bit and see if making it a tighter crop will give you a stronger composition. Oops, went too far. Well, now where am I? Which way do I need to go? This way. Wow, that jumped. How'd that jump so far? That doesn't make any sense. Well, we're going way back. How'd that jump so far? Oh, I went the wrong way. That's my problem. All right. And now I'm totally out. Let me scroll up. Can you just, no, up here, go up this way. We'll get us back to where we need to be. And then, oh no, it was down. Go down. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going. It's past this. Keep going right there. And then back to slideshow. I don't know what this clicker did, but it did something. All right. So again, eliminate the sky in intimate landscapes because it really doesn't do a lot for you. Even when you have a good sky, they're important in big landscapes, but not intimate. You want to focus in on your subject, not the big scene. So not a lot of sky up there, but there's some. So your eye goes to the brightest spot in an image, and so your eye's going up here a lot. And these trees are right here, and look at the difference by cropping in on those as I take that picture. And again, your eye goes to the lightest spots, but also remember that your eye will go to the darkest spots too. So pay attention to both of those. So this is just, and this is from Toledo, Maumee Bay. How many people have been up to Maumee Bay State Park? Have you done the boardwalk? Yeah, isn't that beautiful? But see, starting a little bit bigger here, and then working our way down. All right, so 3 essential concepts with this whole intimate landscape piece. You need to see the abstract qualities in an image scene. So again, the line, shapes, texture, patterns, etc. You need to arrange the composition within the frame. And then you need to refine the composition. So you want to look at it on your playback and decide, is this what I'm after? Is this what I was trying to capture? Did I get it? And always remember there's no perfect composition and there's no perfect picture. Okay? And especially with small scenes, with a big landscape, there can be some goofiness in there and it may get lost in the scene. In an intimate landscape, the goofiness in there is going to stand out because it's a much smaller scene and a lot less to look at. So composition, let's look at this just a little bit. All right, so it's the interaction, the arrangement, interaction, and flow of elements within the scene. So those are the things we're paying attention to. Tools or concepts are the building blocks that we use to bring our composition together and all the elements. There is no right way to compose a scene. It is what speaks to you. And your vision, goals, visual preferences, and in connection with the scene should drive your decisions. So this is in the Smokies. I was with 2 good friends. We were driving through Roaring Fork, We came to a spot where there were some cabins and barns over on the other side of the road, found a place to park, and they jump out and they're all excited about going over to shoot all the buildings and everything. And I get out of the car and I look down, and this is what I saw. And that's where I stayed. So somebody was teasing me the other day about a photo walk we did a couple years ago with a camera club. And he said, I've never seen anybody like you. He said, we have this whole nature preserve, and you found these flowers, and 2 hours later, you were still there. And, you know, I didn't go home with tons of pictures of the whole nature preserve, but I went home with a picture I really liked. And that can be a difference as well. So composition is about I can't get that word out tonight, but you read it. Real concrete things, let's put it that way. Things you can touch and see. But it's also the abstract things, again, the lines and all of that. It's the space around your elements in the frame. It's also the space in between the elements in a frame. And it's the light. So how does that light impact the scene? What does it do? How does it highlight your subject? What's the direction of the light? What's the color of the light? And what affects composition? So these are all those things about where are you standing? You know, the Ansel Adams quote about standing in the right spot. So it's your distance from the subject. It's how high you are or how low you are. So it's real easy to stand here and take all of our shots from here, isn't it? But it's not so easy to get down there. But maybe down there is where you need to be. So think about, where do I need to stand? It can be, is this the right spot, or do I need to be over here? Or do I need to be over there? Think about those things. It's what focal length you're using. So what lens do you have on the camera, and is it the right lens? And if not, put a different lens on. One of the things I preach in my head to myself when I go out to shoot, do not be lazy. You put all that camera gear in your camera bag and you put it on your back and you're hauling it around. Take it out and use it. Because otherwise, just leave it in the car. Pay attention to the light and the shadows. What are they doing to the scene? Are you going to blow out parts of that scene? And if so, what do you need to do about that? What's your point of focus? So where do I want my sharpest focus? And depth of field. Do I want the whole thing in focus, or do I want a shallow depth of field in the background? And I want my focus to be primarily on one thing. So in this scene, it's right there, but you can see the focus falling off as we go back. If that was sharply in focus, this tree wouldn't be standing out. So think about that. What's your exposure? Do you have the right exposure? And again, sometimes you need to take several different exposure settings because you're not sure what's going to look right. And the final determination of that should be on the computer screen when you get home. Don't throw stuff away in your camera. Go home and look at it, because what you thought wasn't good maybe is your best. And I'll say it over and over, don't plant your feet. So we want to arrange elements to lead the viewer's eye through the scene. So these rocks down here in my foreground are leading you back to that little flow of water back there. So how are you arranging elements? Where are you standing? How are you using those elements to create a composition that takes the viewer into the scene and keeps them in there as best and as long as you can? Again, the depth of field. How much do I want in focus? In this scene, I want sharp depth of field front to back because those rocks need to be in focus, but so does that waterfall. If that waterfall is out of focus or if it's soft, that's not going to be a good shot. Again, decide what to include and to exclude. Simplify. You want to communicate a very clear, concise message about what you're shooting. Pay attention to distractions, details, and imperfections. and tell a story with your pictures. So just a real quick run through of compositional tools. You guys should know all this. Foreground, middle ground, background. That creates a sense of depth in your image. And what helps in foreground, middle ground, background is change in color or physicality of your subjects. Tool of thirds, and I say tool, not rule. All of these are tools, not rules. But putting something here is more visually pleasing most of the time, but that doesn't mean centering doesn't work. Sometimes centering is exactly what you need. People portraits, pet portraits, flower portraits are all very good centered. But here's that same tree centered and on a third. And they both work, don't they? It's just which one do you like the most? Rule of odds. This is a tool that's used in gardening all the time. When they plant things, we just had, before all the snow and stuff, we had a new landscape wall put in, and they put a few plants in. They put 5 in. Not 4, not 6, 5. 5 is more visually pleasing to us, and that doesn't mean it doesn't work. So I've got 3 right here that are my dominant trees. And while these, if you add them all together, you've got 8, but it's more, these are 1 that you see, and these are 1 that you see, so you kind of have 5. But rule of odds is a good one to use. And usually they say going over 7 items in a picture is about as far as you want to get, because then you get too cluttered. Using lines, and these are just a few. There's so many: diagonals, leading lines, S-curves, zigzags. But they take the viewer eye through that picture and up over that hill. Repeating elements or patterns. And the important thing about repeating is that there's something that needs to be in that image that breaks it. So different texture, different color. In this case, it's a different color. So you want to break the pattern somehow. If that thing was all the green leaves, it would not be as interesting of a composition. Using frames. And typically you do not want to totally, I mean, sometimes we shoot through windows and everything else, and that works. But usually doing an L frame, something like that, that just kind of gives it some structure but doesn't totally enclose it. And what that does is draws our attention to the mountain in the background. Using color. And color is one of our building blocks, and typically can be one of the strongest things in an image because color stands out. Color has emotional feelings to it. So what do people associate red with? Throw a word out. Yep. Anger. So look at the feelings and emotions that one color creates. And I do a whole presentation on color theory, and there is so much about color that's important. Using colors, you know, complementary colors, or all of those things. So that emotional response, people respond to those things. So think about colors and how you're using them. In nature, the only way we control color is how we compose it in our view. We can't move it around or change it. And then attributes of color, and this is an important piece. Soft light reveals all colors. Bright light saturates your primary colors. Warm colors advance, so they come at you. You see those before you see the cool colors that recede. And a warm to cool transition in a photo makes it a strong image. Somebody shared a research study about color, and they talked about the warm to cool transition. And you want to work your butt off to get warm to cool transition in your image if you can. And they said the images that did the best when they were being submitted to competitions or being submitted to be reviewed for inclusion in an exhibit, the thing that the judges responded the most to in an image, the images that were picked more than any others, were ones that had warm to cool color transitions in them. So whenever you can put those warm colors and those cool colors in the same image, you're going to have a stronger image. And this is just a real quickie, and the notes for all of this are on your website, so you can get these. If you, and this comes into play more with intimate landscapes, and especially if you're doing close-up or macro work on a flower. Blue especially, how many of us have shot bluebells and we get home and you're like, whoa, that color isn't even close to what I thought it should be. Your camera is going to read those colors differently than we see them. And so you have to do exposure compensation adjustments to get those colors to render the way you want them to when they are primarily filling the camera frame. Okay, so that'll be in the notes. This is not something I ever try to memorize. When people ask me, how do you remember all this stuff? When I need to remember stuff like this, I can't. It's on a 3x5 index card in my camera bag. And when I need it, I pull it out. Pay attention to the light in your landscapes. So shade, I mean a misty, rainy day, give me that over anything. My husband said, you photographers are the only people I know that don't like bright sunny days. But low contrast and soft light just makes for beautiful photography. This was on Tremont Road in the Smokies. Tremont Road hardly ever gets fog, and on this day it had fog. And this was taken when we were starting to come out of the lockdowns with COVID. And we had canceled one of the workshops, the spring workshop that year because of COVID. But we went ahead with the fall workshop with half the class size and all kinds of restrictions. And I went down a couple days early and I was out shooting. And the day was like this all day long. And I don't know if anybody knows the name Bill Lee. Bill's a pretty famous photographer down in the Smokies. He's very well known for white-tailed deer, but now for black bears. And he used to be one of the instructors at Tremont for the spring workshop. And Bill and I just kept crossing paths all day long, out taking pictures. And it was just like Mother Nature's gift to, it just felt like a gift. You know, to have been locked up for not doing anything and then to get down finally into the Smokies and then to have a day like this. I mean, it was just so memorable. So a day like this, I mean, and then it just, that fog in the background, there's lots of trees. There's a total big, huge hillside behind it. But that fog minimizes that, makes those trees stand out. That's just wonderful. And the nice thing about intimate landscapes, you can shoot any time of day because you can get into trees and shade. You can use a diffuser and knock the light down. It's just a fun genre. And then backgrounds are important. And remember that you can choose the background, not always, but a lot of the times just by moving. Backgrounds are important. They set off your image. So pay attention to what's in the background. Make sure there's no distractions that take away from your primary subject. So this is up in the Canadian Rockies, and it's just all these trees, and they all look the same, but these stand out, and these don't distract because there's nothing back there. They're all just a quiet background. Make sure your background integrates with your main subject. So like with this one, lots of fall leaves back here and down here and on the picnic table, and it all ties together. And then eliminating distractions in your pictures. So check your backgrounds. Do your border patrol around the frame of your image. Even my border patrol extends even into my post-processing because my processing, I still use Adobe Camera Raw because that's what I use, or learned on, and it's basically Lightroom. I do my raw processing there, and then I go into Photoshop. And the very first thing I do is create a clone layer. And I start looking at my image, and is there anything, any distractions? I blow that image up, and the first thing I do is I scroll around the edges. That is the very first thing I do in cloning and in Photoshop. And then I slowly move into the image and look at, are there things that I need to address? But I'm big on that border patrol. looking for things that don't belong. Watch your merges when you take a picture. So if you went back to those trees in the Canadian Rockies, you want to make sure that your primary trees that are the main part of your composition aren't merging, they're not overlapping, that there's space in between them. Those merges become very important sometimes. Do your photo gardening. And boy, there's nothing worse as I've gotten older to get down on the ground to do an intimate landscape with a flower, and then I look through the camera or look at the screen and I'm like, oh shit. And then I have to get up and go move something, and then I get back down, and then then I see something else, and then I have to get up again. But that photo gardening, it's okay to move stuff as long as it's not living. And simplify your composition. You can do intimate architectural landscape. So this is Kentuck Knob, a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Pennsylvania. Big scene with the house, but then you start to narrow it down to the elements within that scene. If you've never been there, I liked this house better than Falling Water, and Falling Water is pretty impressive. Start with the bigger scene and then start looking for the little stuff. So this is at Elkmont, and just finding all the little things. This is before the houses were fixed up. And all the little details that you can find by walking around and looking. Even the floor and the light on the wall. Intimate waterscapes. So this is West Virginia, a little bit bigger of a scene, but right here is a more intimate scene. And they're both pretty, but the one on the right's a little simpler and just a peaceful scene. So lots of water things. And with shooting water, you have to pay attention to a couple things. So depending on how you like your water to look, if you like that soft look versus you want to capture the flow as you see it, you have to think about that. And then how fast is the water moving? How much water is there? What's the focal length of your lens? Because that makes a difference. How close are you to the water, and how much light is on that scene? This is an overcast day, had a polarizer on it, obviously, if I'm shooting water. But if this had been a bright day and I really wanted that, I might have had to have put a neutral density filter on to make it dark enough of a scene to slow the water down. But when you're shooting water, you still want to have some structure, what I call teeth. You don't want that all blown out. There's a big scene in the Canadian Rockies, but then go into smaller scenes. A cityscape, but then just focusing on the reflection. And some more reflections. Creating flower portraits. So a bigger scene, but then getting down to the eye level of the flower and shooting. But there's still background back there. Use a simple background, but it needs to contrast with your main subject, whether brightness, darkness, color, soft focus, sharp focus. You want to keep a tight framing that emphasizes the flower, but give it room to breathe. And you can keep it from being too centered, but sometimes centering's okay. Focus in on the details, but then show the plant in its environment. Oops. So that's the whole group. And then just because it's winter or fall doesn't mean flowers aren't still beautiful in their own way. So go shoot those as well. And environmental portraits, so things that you find in the environment that you want to capture. Again, paying attention to the environment, the background, the foreground. Incorporate enough of the background that you give it some story, some sense of where is this and what's happening here. Use enough depth of field to give you some structure in the background and give you a sense of place, but not so much that it distracts from your main subject. And again, you want your subject to stand out from the background. And abstract images. So again, focusing on those abstract components that we've been talking about. That's a wrought iron table with snow on it. And light and composition still are important with abstracts. So, a quote from Minor White, one should not only photograph, that should be just photograph, things for what they are, but for what else they are. So I have become a huge fan of intentional camera movement. If people like that and you do not know the name Stephanie Johnson, please look her up. She is very, very good. She does online classes and all kinds of things, but she's amazing. Oh, did she? She's wonderful. So again, we're concentrating on the abstracts, okay? Not the real strong components, the abstracts of that. And you can create such unique and creative and artistic images. And this was just trying to do a pan. And man, this stuff is a ton of trial and error and a ton of throwing stuff away. And that was just doing panning just when I was starting. Didn't get as much pan as I wanted, but it became my favorite image of everything that I did there. And again, I've got some warm to cool transitions in there that I really like. Look for abstract elements. And again, you can do all kinds of things. So this is a zoom, and what I love about this one is, you know, this is a zoom, but it looks like it's coming out of here. It may have cropped that a little. But look at how in focus that one is on the edge, which is, I mean, it was just so interesting. This is a double, you know, panning one way and panning the other, and that's just a straight pan. And you can do all kinds of things. And you can actually, like this, because that's a multiple exposure pan. So on a tripod, I'm taking a shot, moving the camera, take a shot, move the camera, take a shot, move the camera, take a shot. So, and you can actually count how many slices I've got in there if you get up and look at it. I think that one's 9. And this is just demonstrating, this is just a straight shot. This is a pan, that's a zoom, and that's that multiple exposure pan. And how different each of those are by using the different techniques. All right, so I'm going to finish up with point counterpoint, because contrast, you can call these contrast, point counterpoint, juxtapositions, whatever you want to call it. When you can put contrast in your image, you are going to strengthen that image and make it really strong. They really add to the power of an image, and if you can have more than one contrast, it's going to be even better. So the point is the main subject. The counterpoint is typically your second subject. You can have 2 strong focal points, and those are kind of cool because you create that visual tension. Your eye goes back and forth between the 2. And if you get a diagonal line in there, even better. So you can have point counterpoint with color. So you've got your warm to cool transition there. You've got the point, the color there. And just that one little spot of yellow in that kind of neutral scene. But where does your eye go? To the leaf. You can have the warm and cool tones. And again, warm colors come at you, cool colors recede. You can have textures. So I've got the texture of the ice and the texture of the flowing water, and then you throw the rocks in there. So texture is an important detail. We can almost feel that, can't you, when you see good texture? To use that in an image makes it just really strong. More textures, that soft torn screen. Static element versus an element in motion. This was the day before a hurricane came into Naples, Florida, when we were on vacation. And when they had some serious rain. You have large and small, and that contrast between the size differences. Shape differences, or straight versus curved lines. Animate versus inanimate, or man-made versus nature. The right thing in the wrong place. This was the Auburn Car Museum in Auburn, Indiana. and just this funky old building with all these cars and gas pumps and signs, and they were set up for a wedding later in the day. So you have all this wedding stuff in the midst of this car museum. It was like, what? And it was freezing cold in there, guys. This was like November, beginning of November, and there was very little heat in this building. I mean, we had coats on and I was cold the whole time we were in there. And we saw this wedding set up, and when we went back out and went through the visitor center, I talked to the guy and I said, "Are you turning heat on in there later today?" And he says, "That's kind of the way it's going to be." And the guy who was getting married volunteered there and really wanted his wedding there, and they tried to talk him out of it because of the time of year, but so I'm sure all the women in their beautiful dresses had winter coats on over top of them. But it was a pretty cool setup, but in better temperatures. So weird things and icy roads, and you can't imagine ice there. But so what will you see? There is an amazing world of unusual, interesting, and unique subjects up close. It doesn't matter where you live, the time of day, or what the weather conditions are. You can always find the small scenes to photograph. So get out there, start looking for the small stuff, the details, the scene within the scene. Be creative, have fun, and you have homework assignments, but you don't have to turn them in. But it's a way to think about it. So back in the days when we shot film, and you took classes, and they used to say, take a roll of 36, go out, find a subject, and shoot it 36 times. We did one in our camera club where we had to go out and we had to find what we wanted to shoot, and we had to stand in one place. We could turn around, but I couldn't go over there. I had to stay right here, and I had to take 10 photos from the same spot. So different camera lenses, different perspectives. But learn how your lenses see. Again, don't be lazy. This spot is in the Smokies on Tremont Road. You can see the water comes down this hillside and works its way down. I was attracted to the red roots. The water flow is perfect. Sometimes this is bone dry, sometimes it's overflowing. I shot here for 2 hours, I kid you not, and I used every lens in my camera bag. I put my boots on, I got in the water, I went up the hillside and shot up here. I worked this scene. So I used my stuff, and I wasn't lazy, and I was so proud of myself. Again, don't be afraid to fail. It's how we learn. Make reminder note cards. Again, carry a little notebook in your bag. Or, when you're trying to learn a new technique, or you need, something new on your camera controls you're trying to learn, write it down until you get it stuck up here. And take notes in the field. All right, another one that you can do, and you can do this sitting at home, or you can do it out in the field. You could go out and see a grand landscape, put your 70 to 200 on, and stand there and move your camera around and see how many scenes you can find. But you can do this at home if you got some good grand landscape pictures. Put it up on your computer, get your crop tool, and start playing. Okay, do it on a copy so you don't wreck your original. But see how many scenes you can find within a scene. That helps you learn to see. And then go out and find a large landscape, and from that large landscape, make a small landscape. Okay. Any questions on that? And I have here the Elliott Porter books up here. If people want to just take a quick glance at them, they're pretty cool. Any questions? I know it's a lot of stuff I threw at you, but the L bracket? Yeah, I get mine from Really Right Stuff. It's a piece of metal that's basically an L, and it goes on. So if this is my camera, it goes on like this. They are designed to go with your camera and your tripod, okay? So when you order it, you have to order it based on your camera model. because, all of our cameras, they have different spots where your remote controls plug in and stuff like that. So it's designed to fit your camera. And then again, if you're taking a picture, lend me your hand. All right, just hold it up like this. Okay, so if I'm taking a picture of his hand, all right, and I've got my camera here, all right, that's my composition. If I don't have an L bracket, when I go like this, look at how my composition has changed. The focus is here, but now it's here. Whereas with an L bracket, if I've got this set up, I take it off the camera, put it back in, and it's right there. So it's such a nice tool to have in terms of setting up your composition and then keeping your composition when you go from vertical to horizontal or the other direction. But Really Right Stuff is a good place to get them. Yep.
Do me a favor, please. Let me bring the mic around so everybody else at home can hear your questions. Thank you.
Can you speak briefly to the workshop that you've been going to for 20 years?
In the Smokies?
Yes, as far as what makes it so special that you keep going back, and other than changing to digital, what else has kind of changed over the years with that?
With that workshop? I don't think anybody's been to that workshop, have they? Okay. I've been to several different workshops with different people. Charlie Waite from England, Charlie Kramer, John Barclay, Will Clay. And they've all been good workshops. There's something about Tremont, and it's at the Great Smoky Mountain Institute at Tremont. So if you just do gsmit.org, you'll get it. Or if you just put Tremont Institute, it'll come up. Tremont is a place that does education for kids a lot. They train teachers on ecology and nature and stuff like that. But they bring kids in for 4 and 5 days, usually late elementary and into middle school. But there's been high schoolers there and college kids too. And they just spend this time in the park learning, and they have all these educators. It's just a wonderful place. It's in the park. If you know the Smokies at all, it's outside of Townsend, which is the quiet side of the Smokies. And the workshop, it ends up, full capacity is 35 people, which sounds huge. We don't always get to that, but there's 5 instructors. We all have different, I'm the intimate landscaper. You got Dan he's a water guy. Man, if you want to learn how to get in streams and shoot streams, you're going with Dan. Dan and Steve both know night photography. So everybody's got their niche, and so you get a whole lot of stuff. We do a lot of field stuff. We do instruction in the classroom. Every instructor does a presentation. But what's special about this place, and you have to experience it, there is a camaraderie there that is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I'm dead serious about this. My best friends are from Tremont. And I'm the oldest. We've got one that's 43. We're scattered. We've got Atlanta. We've got Cincinnati. We've got St. Louis. We've got, we're from all over the place. And the friendships that I have made down there are priceless to me. Absolutely priceless. And every workshop, a half to a 2/3, as much as 2/3 of the class at times, are repeats. They come back. Not once, not twice. We got people like me. I've not missed a workshop. My husband says if I die right before the workshop, I'm not going anywhere. Go to the workshop. You can bury me when you get home. And it's on my calendar in blood. It's like I am a diehard Reds fan, and I am just scared to death of them ever getting to the World Series, because I'm going to have to decide if I'm going to the Smokies or going to the World Series. And I don't want to make that decision because I think Smokies would win out. It's just a really, I think what the camaraderie comes because, like the 5 instructors, we are so close. We stay connected all year long. I drove down and back in 2 days to go down and meet with them right after Christmas to share our 5 favorite photos of the year. And it was worth that 5-hour drive down and turn around and do it the next day. But I think it's because those friendships are there already, and so new people coming in just get sucked into it. The Tremont staff are incredible. A lot of young people, they are so good at what they do. We do it every fall and every spring. Spring this year is the Palm Sunday weekend, and fall will be the Halloween weekend. But we go from Friday afternoon to Monday afternoon. And you can stay in the dorms in Tremont if you want. They are dorms, they're meant for kids, bunk beds and concrete walls and big open rooms. Or you can rent, a hotel or a cabin in Townsend. And it's fairly reasonable. I forget, it's under $1,000. And that is the workshop, it's the dorm if you want it, it's all your meals. It's not gourmet meals, but they feed us okay. But it's well worth attending, and most people who come are just very, very pleased with it. There's a guy that came last time for the first time, and if you get on the Tremont website, I think they've got it on there now. He wrote just an incredible article about attending workshops and how valuable they are. And then he went on to talk about the Tremont workshop and what that meant to him. So, that's something worth reading. But I'd encourage you to come because it truly is a wonderful experience. And the instructors are they're like me, just nobodies that love what they do. So.
How much of the Tremont Institute classes, how many are indoors, and then how much time do you spend outside shooting?
It's a pretty good mix. Friday afternoon is all inside. One of the lead instructors, Tom Vadney, does what he calls the fundamentals of photography. And his is like a 2-hour session, and it just goes through all kinds of basics. But as many times as I've heard Tom do it, and it's like I know it by heart almost, but it's always like, okay, I forgot I should be doing that, or something clicks this time that hasn't clicked before. So I was an early childhood educator, and the joke was repetition, repetition, repetition. Yes, you've read the 3 Little Bears how many times, but that's why it's important, because that's how you learn. So on Saturday morning, we go out and shoot in the morning, and you're not going to get any sleep. I always recommend to people, the workshop ends at noon on Monday, go home on Tuesday, because you're going to need to sleep Monday afternoon, or it's not safe for you to drive. We get up very early. Sometimes we are wheels up at 5 a.m. Spring is worse than fall because of the hours of daylight. But we go out and do sunrise on foothills on Saturday morning. Then we'll come back mid-morning, and then we stay in, and we'll have a presentation in the morning, and usually one after lunch, and you have time to download your images. The instructors all walk around.
They die?
Here, I'll borrow the mic. We walk around and help people with their processing. If they, just want an opinion as to what do you think, and we'll sit down and show them how to process something if they're struggling. So we do a lot of hands-on help with that. We do hands-on in the field.
Test?
Now it's working.
It's back.
We don't shoot a lot during the workshop, the instructors, but we will get our cameras out if it's really spectacular. And I usually keep my camera with me. I like to take pictures of participants, but I also like to demonstrate because I know my camera and I can demonstrate easier than trying to do it on yours. And then mid-afternoon, and we do our big meal at noon, at lunchtime, And then we do a sack lunch in the field, and that came as a recommendation from participants. And so mid-afternoon, 3 to 4, depending on the light, we head back out and we stay out until it gets dark. And then we go back, and then if people want to stay and sit and process, we'll stay for a while until we get tired and say, you guys keep going, we're going to bed. And then the next day we go back out, and we've started doing this both workshops. One of the highlights of this is that Tremont has the key for the gate to Cades Cove. And sometimes they leave that gate open, but usually they close it at sunset and they open it at whenever sunrise is. We have the key and we can go in at 5 a.m. if we want, and we do. And we go back and we do breakfast is in the field. We take food out in the field, and then they have snacks when we get back. But we go into Cades Cove and we shoot in the cove. And then we go back and again do instruction. We do a critique on Sunday afternoon. And then we shoot again in the evening, and then we go back out Monday morning, and that's usually, sometimes we go back to Cades Cove. We do Elkmont. So it's really a mixture back and forth. But a lot of hands-on in the field. We all walk around. You know, if you want to go do water, you go with Dan. If you want to go do flowers in the spring, you come with me, you know, whatever. So it's a mixture, but you get a lot of instruction and a lot of hands-on, classroom and field.
Anybody else?
What time is the quarter watch tomorrow?
Oh. I have to balance it with trying to get home, but it's my husband's birthday, but, you know, he's like into usually we do these big dinners out and everything, but he's gotten into football this year, which he never has been. So he's like, there's football on Saturday. We're not going anywhere. So I'll get home when I get home. So we'll see how hard it's snowing in the morning.
Pictures are amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Been doing it for a long time. Yeah. Yeah. And this is a nice one. Somebody made this. This is a hard plastic. If you have any old slides, you can even use the little slide mount cardboards. They're really tiny. What you want is the ratio that your camera shoots at, okay? So whatever your aspect ratio is, you want this cut out to mimic that. But you can just use, you know, cardstock or something, and if they get bad, then you throw them away and make a new one.
Take the mentor class with Rick Mills and Dennis Wirt, and you'll what? And you'll get one. What is going on? Oh yeah, he hands them out.
On the handout, if you download it or look at it online, my website and my email address are on there. I may even have my phone number. Please reach out anytime. I do not mind. People that attend my classes do it all the time. If you want me to look at an image and say, what do you think? I do that kind of stuff for you. If you got questions, if you can't remember Tremont and you go, what was that workshop? Send me an email and I'll get back to you.
We have a little announcement.
Well, I would like to announce a wonderful opportunity for CPS through our community service. Every year for several years until the pandemic, we had the pleasure and the joy of shooting a Special Olympics basketball tournament, a regional tournament. And I was able to connect with the Northeast Regional Director today, and I found out that they will be having one this year on February 7 and 8. The location for the games will be in Geneva. If you've not done this before, it's a great, wonderful opportunity. We are serving people, and it's an awful lot of fun. The tournament will require several games, probably enough to fill up to a great extent both days. We can use as many photographers as wish to come. There's not a limit, because if you come, you're going to get something out of it, but you're also going to give something out of it. Well, historically, what we've done is at the beginning of each game, someone would take team photographs of each of the teams playing. We would take them to a room where there was someone who was willing to spend the time to print them and put them into folders. When that game was finished, we took those prints out to the coach of those teams. So every athlete, whether they played or not, every athlete went home with their personal copy of a team photo. And then we submitted our photos on disc from all those games, and we collated them so that if we had 6 photographers doing each game, we had 6 photographers for each game, for each team. We took care of all of that. And we provided those discs then to the regional directors for those teams, and they distributed them. It's a phenomenal opportunity. It's fun, it's great, it's serving, and you'll see things that will bless your pants off. And I mean that. Let me just try to give one quick example. There's a photo of the 2 teams at the far end of the gym. The scoreboard is in the photo, and the score is something like 35-6. And all the players are standing kind of idly under the basket, but one of the guys in the blue team is passing the ball to one of the guys in the white team. It's their basket that they're standing under. I had the opportunity to talk to the coach of that team. I said, "Why'd you do that?" He said, "Because I've played on teams like that where we were getting beaten so badly it was horrible." He said, "I didn't want them to suffer the pain." So those are the kind of people we're serving. I would encourage you, there will be a message go out through community service. It's February 7 and 8. Please consider it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Susan. Appreciate it.
So there's no photo? No, just kidding. She'd be amazing to go